Chapter 241, When the Celebration Banquet Was Held. Okay, everyone, let's celebrate Earth and the fact that we humans survived another day in this dangerous universe. In a hotel banquet hall in New York, Tony Stark raised his glass and shouted to the others scattered around the room. "Stark, don't sound like we're in a perpetual crisis. We just drove the invaders off," Bruce Banner said from 2 seats away, a grin on his face. He was pleased with the outcome of the day's defensive battle. Although he hadn't had to turn into the Hulk this time, that suited him just fine. Banner didn't want alien invasions to become routine. Sooner or later, he'd be forced into action again, and the chance to stay put on the Sky Carrier was a luxury he appreciated. Everyone who had been involved in the fight gathered for the dinner Tony hosted. It wasn't a formal state affair. They'd just finished eating and were lingering over drinks and conversation. At the table were Tony and his guests, Pepper and Happy, Noah and his family, recently returned from space, Phil Coulson, Black Widow, Hawkeye, 3 other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, Captain America, Steve Rogers, Banner, who had stayed aboard the carrier, Dr. Shah Waji, the 2 Asgardian brothers, Thor and Loki, and Jane Foster and Daisy, who had come with Thor. A few people Tony had invited couldn't make it because of other duties, Nick Fury and Maria Hill among them. Coulson might have been one of those, but he'd come under orders and didn't have the same obligations. "No, Banner, don't be too comfortable," Tony said after taking a sip of whiskey. "How do we know when the next wave from those invaders will show up? I suspect that after this battle, Earth has been put on the map across the universe. We have to be ready for sudden hits." Noah, sipping a soda nearby, heard him and knew Tony had a point. Repelling Thanos' Chitauri Legion had drawn attention. A planet that survived an assault from forces like that would invite curiosity and envy from other civilizations. The Mad Titan's grand deployment wouldn't go unnoticed, and nobody knew where he might strike next. The news that the Chitauri were decimated only amplified the buzz. For a while, many powers would be watching that blue planet in a distant galaxy. Noah remembered similar hints from other stories he'd known, alternate realities and old broadcasts. In one parallel telling, after Tony flew a nuclear bomb through the portal in New York, he didn't return before it closed and ended up on Sakaar. The Grandmaster talked about Tony's battle against Thanos' army. Details like that suggested the whole episode had been noticed across space. Of course, Earth had already been visited before. The Kree and Skrulls, the Eternals, Yondu's raid to snatch Star-Lord, even the Inhumans on the moon. A planet that could defeat Thanos' forces would be taken seriously. That reputation alone would deter many opportunists. The established powers, the Xandarians prone to peace, the Kree preoccupied elsewhere, were unlikely to make a move right away. Noah didn't know about Corvus Glaive's fate or Thanos' descent into the void, so in his mind, the biggest ongoing threats were Thanos, maybe Corvus Glaive if he was still around, and whatever creatures lurked in the void. Tony set his glass down and grew more serious. "We've all seen civilizations from off-Earth. That wasn't a friendly meeting. Without Thor and Noah, we'd have been hard-pressed to win. If humans had to face them alone, we'd have to do what the World Security Council almost did, keep throwing nuclear bombs until the threat was gone. But that would mean New York and its surrounding cities would be ash." "So what are you suggesting?" Rogers asked. As someone Tony called an ordinary human, Steve took the warning seriously. Everyone turned to Tony, expecting a plan. "I'm saying we keep helping Earth get ready," Tony answered. "Until the planet is strong enough to handle these threats on its own, we should coordinate and provide support when needed." "Don't worry, Stark," Thor said with a broad wave. "Earth lies under Asgard's protection. If foreign enemies invade, we will not stand aside." He nudged Loki with his elbow. "Right, Loki?" Yes, whatever you say," Loki replied, sounding resigned. As the acknowledged heir of Asgard at the moment, Thor didn't want to argue the point. When Coulson heard Tony's proposal, his eyes shone. It sounded a lot like the kind of mission Fury might have assigned him. He was about to stride forward and start talking strategy with Tony when something interrupted him. Noah, still watching everyone's reactions, suddenly felt a prickling awareness, the sense of being watched. This gaze carried a stark, malicious intent. Without thinking, he activated the resolve rune that thrummed beneath his skin and struck out toward the source of that stare. Everyone in the room felt the ripple of energy emanate from Noah's direction and turned to look. Chapter 242, Infinity Gems Lesson, Part 1. Noah didn't know exactly where his attack had landed, nor who the target had been. He only funneled the power of the Resolve rune in a certain direction, following a sudden instinct that flared in his chest. The rune inside him had finally stilled from its earlier vibration, and the malignant presence he had felt was gone, either destroyed by his strike or driven off by the force of it. For a moment he wondered who could have been watching them. Heimdall crossed his mind first, but Noah had felt Heimdall's sight before, and it wasn't like this. This gaze carried an unusual, corrosive malice. When he replayed the tremor in his head, a familiar taint surfaced, the taste of corrupted void energy, the same as from not long ago. It clicked into place. Corvus Glaive wasn't dead after all. Noah had suspected as much when those void creatures had shown up before. If Corvus had escaped, he would regroup and come back with an army. Noah made a quick decision. He needed to prepare. When he returned to space, he had to connect to the universal internet as soon as possible and start tracking intel across the universe. Corvus would rebuild in secret and mass-produce soldiers. If Noah wanted any chance of finding him, he had to monitor every scrap of information he could. "Noah, what happened?" Thor's voice sounded in his ear. When Noah looked up, he realized everyone at the banquet had been staring at him. Lysandra, who was sitting beside him, asked the question. The energy fluctuation had been noticeable, subtle but unsettling. It hadn't physically affected anyone, but their hearts had skipped. Thor and Loki, more sensitive to these things, were visibly strained. Loki was discreetly wiping sweat from his brow. "It's nothing. Just a small accident," Noah said, forcing a smile. "Sorry to interrupt everyone's evening. I'll make a toast as self-punishment." They watched him raise the soda in his hand with bemused expressions. What kind of punishment was that? But Noah's calm carried weight. Whatever had happened clearly wasn't anything they needed to fear. Given the New York battle earlier and how much people already knew of Noah's power, a sudden disturbance was unnerving to the crowd. "I thought you were going to argue with what I said, Noah," Tony quipped from across the table. "No, Tony, what you said makes sense," Noah answered, setting his glass down. "Earth has been exposed to other civilizations. They'll come back." Banner leaned forward. "What is it about Earth that draws them? Resources? Humanity itself?" He already had his own suspicion. Given where those aliens had first appeared, they'd been after the Tesseract. "Isn't that obvious?" Noah said. He decided not to leave them in the dark. Most of them had learned about the stones too late in the movies. He reached into his belt and brought out a small nanomechanical projector. With a firm slap, he set it on the table. A blue hologram flared up above the wood. Jane and her friend Daisy stared, mouths open. The image resolved into the Tesseract, pure blue, humming with power. Many in the room recognized it immediately. Steve Rogers, who had slept through 70 years because of this very thing, stiffened. "The Tesseract," Noah said, "an artifact S-Shield has had custody of for years. Once it became the focus of secret research, it also drew attention from outside, other civilizations." The three S-Shield agents in the room shifted under the look directed at them. Coulson cleared his throat. "Ahem. We never meant for any of that to happen. It was an accident. No one anticipated the consequences. If you had simply sealed and stored the Tesseract properly, instead of poking at it, this wouldn't have occurred," Rogers said bluntly, eyes on Coulson. "Has S-Shield forgotten what happened the last time someone abused that kind of power?" He didn't need to add the name. Everyone knew of Red Skull and the horrors he had unleashed with the Tesseract, until Rogers himself had put a stop to it at great cost. Coulson looked chastened, but said no more. These were classified matters best not argued over in a social setting. Noah let the moment pass, then resumed his demonstration. He waved his hand and brought up another projection beside the Tesseract, a different gem, muted and subtle. He didn't name it. He nudged both images into a corner and then changed the scene entirely. "At the beginning," Noah began, "there was the void." The projection faded to pitch black, absolute emptiness. Before the universe was born, there were no planets, no stars, nothing to see. Then the Big Bang happened. The universe was created, and with its 6 immensely powerful gems, they were scattered across space by that first blast. A single point of light flared in the darkness, then blossomed into a blinding bloom. Everyone instinctively turned away as the projection seemed to pulse at their faces. When the light dimmed, the blackness had become a vast, slowly rotating vortex of galaxies, countless pinwheels and spirals turning in the holographic void. The image held them, a visual explanation for the ancient and cosmic forces Noah was about to describe. The miniature universe hovering above the table didn't look like a mere projection. It looked real. Countless planets, stars, and galaxies braided together into a complex, harmonious whole. Everyone stared at the lifelike model with a sense of immersion. This was no ordinary hologram. Noah had woven his magic and his understanding of the cosmos into the illusion, which was why it felt so vivid. A point of light above the miniature began to split and spread, forming 6 gems that orbited one another. They glowed in different colors: blue, red, purple, green, yellow, and orange. These 6 stones are unimaginably powerful, Noah said. Collectively, they're called the Infinity Stones. All eyes fixed on the stones suspended in Noah's hand. Nobody really knew what they were, but from Noah's description, it was clear they were far from ordinary. Noah halted their orbit and arranged the stones in a straight line in front of him. Space, reality, power, time, mind, soul, he named, each word measured. Each stone corresponds to a unique power and attribute capable of shaping the forces and phenomena of the universe. He introduced the name and ability of each stone, then projected short scenes above each one to demonstrate teleportation and manipulating space above the space stone, altering matter and possibility above the reality stone, planet-shattering force above the power stone, time reversal above the time stone, mind control above the mind stone, and twisting life and essence above the soul stone. This sounds a bit, Banner muttered, watching the glittering gems and the impossible scenes. Unscientific, right? No, Noah said, looking around the room. In this universe, science isn't the only way to explain reality. The Infinity Stones are forces that transcend our understanding. They lie beyond science. They all absorbed the words in stunned silence. The scope of what Noah described was almost incomprehensible. 6 small stones that could move worlds, rewrite reality, end time. Even Thor and Loki, who knew more about cosmic artifacts than anyone else present, were taken aback. Asgard had in the past known the whereabouts of 2 Infinity Stones. Odin had feared their power and sealed them away without telling Thor and Loki. In the original timeline, Thor learned of the stones only when Scarlet Witch pulled him into a vision during the second Avengers incident. He later sought out the Water of Sight to find answers. The present revelation made the assembled Asgardians uneasy. "So is the Tesseract one of these stones?" Tony asked, rubbing his chin and not taking his eyes off the line of gems. Noah pulled forward projections of the Tesseract and the scepter that had once held the Mind Stone. He touched each model at a single point. The cube of the Tesseract dissolved into blue light, revealing a pulsing blue gem inside, the Space Stone. The blue tip of the scepter split away, revealing a yellow stone nestled within, the Mind Stone. Because the Tesseract and the Mind Stone carried by those invaders are 2 of the Infinity Stones, Noah said. They came here for those stones. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Coulson and the others who had studied the Tesseract for years looked dumbstruck. They had never imagined there was a gem inside its shell. Shield's hardness tests had only shown that the Tesseract's outer matrix was virtually indestructible, so whatever lay inside had remained a mystery. "Where are those 2 now? Did the enemy take them?" Tony asked, suddenly very interested in their whereabouts. Noah considered for a heartbeat. He didn't want to admit he already had one of them, so he let the answer sound convenient. "The Tesseract vanished through a wormhole during the last battle. It's floating somewhere out in the universe." "Wormhole," Jane blurted involuntarily. As an astrophysicist, she studied Einstein-Rosen bridges, wormholes, and had never actually witnessed one. Her voice drew everyone's attention to her. She flushed and stepped back to Thor's side. "Sorry," she murmured. "What about the Mind Stone?" Loki asked quietly. His eyes darted. The sight of the Infinity Stones had clearly stirred something in him. Noah met Loki's look and smiled. Then he opened his hand. A warm yellow light spilled out, the Mind Stone itself resting in his palm. Everyone inhaled and stared. Tony took an involuntary step forward, frozen as his gaze locked on the gem. Noah closed his fist, and the light vanished. Tony shuddered and steadied himself. "The Mind Stone can control thoughts," Noah said calmly. "It tempts and influences mortals. But even possessing an Infinity Stone isn't enough for most beings. Mortals can't withstand the stone's power. If an ordinary person tries to wield one, the consequences can be catastrophic. They can be destroyed by it." Tony's pale face showed how brief contact with the stone had rattled him. Once Noah hid the gem again, everyone relaxed a fraction, but the gravity of the revelation lingered in the air. After Noah finished explaining the Infinity Stones and revealing that he possessed one, the hall fell into a heavy, stunned silence. In the span of 10 minutes, everyone's emotions had been tossed about. Such explosive news needed time to settle. Loki, standing beside Thor, nudged his brother subtly from behind, signaling him to step away. Thor raised an eyebrow and followed Loki to the edge of the hall. He looked at him questioningly. "What is it, Loki? Do you have something to say?" he asked. Loki stole a glance at Noah, then leaned in and spoke in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. "Thor, this man is lying. He's claiming the Tesseract for himself and making up stories to justify it. The Tesseract must already be in his hands." Thor frowned and glanced toward Noah, then back at Loki. "Loki, what are you talking about? Noah would never." He didn't really believe Loki. Loki's tricks and past mischief in Asgard had sown deep distrust, and Noah was also a friend. Thor wasn't convinced. "Didn't you hear him? He called the Tesseract an Infinity Stone, immensely powerful. Under that temptation, he wouldn't hand it over," Loki pressed, clearly annoyed. "The Tesseract is an Asgardian relic," Thor considered for a moment. "We could just ask him," he said. "Why not go and speak to Noah directly?" Loki's reaction was immediate and alarmed. No, Thor. We must plan this carefully." He pictured the scene, confronting someone like Noah outright, catching him in a lie, risking outrage or a violent reaction. From Loki's view, even he and Thor together might not be enough. Too many questions now could get them killed. He intended to gather Asgard's forces first and confront Noah later. "Plan? Loki, don't stop me." Thor yanked his hand free and moved to go question Noah himself. Before he could step forward, his eyes unfocused and he froze. Loki waved his hand in front of his brother's face, then stepped in front of him to check. Relief washed over him when he sensed Heimdall's presence. He had feared Noah had noticed their conversation and would strike, but it wasn't Noah at all. Heimdall was watching, and his power had stopped Thor. Thor's vision shifted. The banquet hall vanished, and he found himself somewhere familiar, the Bifrost Keep. A voice filled his mind. "Thor, it's me. I've pulled you into my sight." It was Heimdall. His sight could pierce the 9 realms, and he could share that sight with others. Heimdall's voice confirmed what Thor felt. Suddenly, Odin stood beside Heimdall. "Father, are you awake?" Thor cried, startled and then joyful. "No, Thor, I am only an apparition like you," Odin replied. He was projecting, his main self still held in the Odin sleep, conserving his power. Thor steadied himself. "Do you need me, father?" Heimdall bowed and withdrew, leaving father and son alone. Odin looked at Thor with a small smile. "I know everything you have done on Midgard. You did well." Thor returned the smile with earnest pride. "It's what I should do. Loki surprised me. He didn't run and even helped Midgard this time." "You both acted admirably," Odin said, then his expression grew more serious. "There is something you should know." Thor listened, attentive. "You know the Tesseract was once in Asgard's possession," Odin began. "You may not know why I chose to leave it on Earth." Thor asked nothing. He waited. "The Tesseract is one of the Infinity Stones. Legends say whoever masters all 6 gains omnipotence, able to destroy the universe. The stones are coveted by every power in existence. Until now, no force has held more than 2 at once. We, however, once possessed 2. Odin referred to the Tesseract and the Ether, the Reality Stone, taken long ago after the Dark Elves were defeated. Thor listened, surprised. He had not known Asgard had held both. "I understand the danger these stones bring," Odin continued. "To protect Asgard, I sealed them in separate places, one of them on Earth." Thor absorbed this, then waited. Odin wasn't finished. "Asgard is not in a position to hold the Tesseract now. Your friend should keep it," Odin said plainly. He trusted Noah's strength and knew the risks of keeping such power under Asgard's care, especially in his weakening age. Letting it remain with Noah was, he judged, the safer course. Thor nodded, thoughtful. Understood, Father. Chapter 245, Odin's Teachings. Odin knew his time might be running out. Although the line of all fathers enjoyed long lives, the power coursing through them only grew as their energy matured. Odin had entered Odin's sleep to keep the Odin force within him from spiraling out of control. In his later years, he did not want to create another powerful enemy for Asgard. Instead, he chose to shape events. He gave the Tesseract to Noah, making him a strong ally for Asgard. That way, even after Odin passed on to Valhalla, Asgard would still have a powerful friend to call on in a crisis. Thor, when I am gone, all of Asgard will fall to you, Odin said earnestly, patting Thor's shoulder. Father, am I truly ready? Though it was only an illusion, Thor felt the warmth of Odin's palm. His voice trembled. He had never felt prepared to accept the heavy truth of his father's departure, nor the confidence to shoulder the responsibility of protecting Asgard as Odin did. Odin patted his shoulder again, firmer this time, as if imparting strength and wisdom through touch. Thor, you possess great power, but power alone does not make a true leader. You need wisdom, courage, and decisiveness. These are what make a king. Thor's confusion hardened into determination. He placed his hand over Odin's and said firmly, Father, I will remember your teachings. I will protect Asgard with my strength and my wisdom. Odin smiled, eyes shining with pride and expectation. He believed his son was ready. Go back, Thor. Do what you must. He patted Thor's hand once more, then slowly faded. Thor drew a deep breath to settle the mix of excitement and unease inside him. Heimdall, send me back. He called toward the doorway, knowing Heimdall waited beyond the fortress entrance. There was no reply. The next instant Thor was back at the banquet in the Bifrost Bridge fortress. Loki stood before him, waving his hand in front of his face. Slap! Thor swatted Loki's hand away. Ow! Loki cried. What are you doing? Thor's expression was back to normal. Loki rubbed his hand, glanced around at the others still debating the Infinity Stones, straightened the collar of his suit, and asked, Was that Heimdall just now? Did he need something of you? Father wanted to see me, Thor replied. Loki blinked. Father? He's not in Odin's sleep? He looked puzzled. Odin should have been trapped in slumber. How could he stand and speak to Thor? In any case, Thor said, fixing Loki with a steady look as he patted his shoulder, you should forget those thoughts. Father has decided to entrust the Tesseract to Noah for safekeeping. What? Loki yanked his hand away and frowning, his brows knitting tightly. Loki, whatever it is, we'll deal with it when we get back. Thor cut him off. He did not want to continue this argument in the hall. Loki shot Thor an angry glance, scoffed coldly, and moved off to drown his frustrations in drink. To Thor, his brother seemed changed somehow. Noah, who'd been eavesdropping, fell into deep thought. Thor had just had a private conversation with Odin far away in Asgard. Heimdall did possess that ability. Indeed, he could bridge minds and sight. And according to Thor's later remarks, Odin had decided to give him the Tesseract. Noah understood why. Odin was near the end of his life, and without Odin's protection, the current Thor would struggle with future crises. Opening a bond with Noah, making him the Tesseract's guardian, was a way to secure a dependable ally for Asgard in the long run. Noah also knew he could not simply refuse the Tesseract. If Odin was using the transfer to cement Noah's role as an ally, it made sense for Noah to accept. Well, that works, he thought. Less awkward this way. He knew what Odin was preparing for. Asgard's next major threat would come when the Dark Elves were stirred again by the ether and struck at Asgard. Noah intended to gather the stones himself, so he would inevitably be drawn into any conflict around the ether, the Reality Stone. Mastery of the Reality Stone allowed its wielder to bend physical law, create or erase objects, and reshape existence itself, limited only by the power available to fuel such changes. In the original timeline, Thanos' ability to erase half of all life relied heavily on the Reality Stone, but even he needed all 6 stones to make such a universe-wide change. A single Reality Stone alone could still enact tremendous alterations, but changing the fate of the whole cosmos required much more. Noah briefly wondered whether this counted as him taking another stone from Asgard. Then he thought of the facts. Asgard did not want the ether uncertain and dangerous as it was. After Thor and his allies defeated the Dark Elves and recovered the ether, they hadn't placed it in Odin's vault. They sent it to the Collector on the land of Nihility. The Collector, the merchant from the Guardians of the Galaxy who dealt in rare and dangerous cosmic artifacts, had been powerful in the comics, though in the movies he'd appeared as an eccentric old man who was soon robbed by Thanos. Clearly, Odin dared not meddle with the Infinity Stones anymore. He feared the catastrophe they could bring. If Asgard was willing to let it go, Noah had no qualms about taking it for safekeeping and for his own plans. In the end, Noah accepted the logic. If Asgard didn't want the ether, why not take it? The banquet went on. The earlier shock over Noah's announcement about the Infinity Stones had faded into a tense, curious buzz. Agent Coulson had drifted over to Tony Stark to discuss arrangements. Tony's initial remarks fit neatly with Nick Fury's Avengers initiative, and Coulson suspected he could begin the initiative's first step with Stark. Fury had sent him for exactly that reason. Hawkeye lingered nearby, listening in, while Black Widow mingled among the women at the banquet, quietly building useful connections. Pepper pulled the women aside for a private exchange. Stories, gossip, introductions. Gwen and Lysandra were there. Since Lysandra's transformation into a human, her cold, mechanical manner had softened. She laughed and spoke easily with the others. Jane and Daisy had joined as well. Daisy had been brought along by Jane. She wasn't a genius like Jane, and she didn't date a god, but her cheerful, easygoing nature won Pepper over. Pepper even promised Jane a job at Stark Industries after graduation, a steady future, in return for the pleasant conversation. In the If 2 Christmas episode, Daisy later works at Stark Tower. Jane had at first wanted to stay with Banner and Dr. Shaw Wade to talk science, but she slipped easily into the warm group. Meanwhile, Banner and Dr. Shawag had peppered Noah with questions after he'd spoken about the Infinity Stones. Noah didn't mind. He kept one eye on Thor while exchanging ideas about the stones and even produced some Tesseract research to discuss. He thought Dr. Shawag might be a valuable addition to his scientific circle if Banner could warm him up first. When Thor and Loki returned from the edge of the room, Noah finished his conversation. "Banner, Dr. Shawagi, I have something I need to take care of. Excuse me for a moment," he said, glancing toward Thor. "Go on, Noah," Banner said, then dove back into the discussion. Noah tucked his notes away and walked over to the two brothers. "Thor," he said, "I need to talk with you. Somewhere private." Thor paused and nodded. "Wait, I'm coming too," Loki said, slipping after them. He wanted to see what kind of charm Noah was working on Thor. On some level, he suspected his father and brother had been influenced by this human, even given him the Tesseract. "No objection," Noah said, raising an eyebrow, and let Loki follow. They stepped out onto the balcony. Below, New York was still in cleanup after the battle. Agencies and crews removed debris and hazardous material, hauling dangerous artifacts back to research facilities. Thor watched the city for a moment, then turned to Noah with a mixture of cool reserve and something like gratitude. He'd been annoyed at Noah's earlier deception, but Noah had helped him, and Odin had apparently agreed to entrust the Tesseract to his care. The irritation didn't last. Noah led them to the railing and faced them. "Thor, first I owe you an apology," he said. He and Thor were friends, and Noah wanted to clear the air. Thor looked surprised. He'd known, of course, but he hadn't expected Noah to bring it up so directly. Noah opened his hand. The Tesseract sat there, throbbing with cold blue light. Thor's lips tightened. He could have pretended not to have known, but that would have been embarrassing, so he chose a firmer tone. "I knew," he admitted. "I spoke with my father, the All-Father. The Tesseract is too dangerous. He decided it should be kept out of the wrong hands, and entrusted it to you for safekeeping." Loki bristled. "Thor, the Tesseract is an Asgardian treasure. How could you hand it to a human? When did you and the All-Father become so weak?" "Loki, that was Odin's decision," Thor said, frowning, his voice sharpening. Noah watched the brothers' argument with a faint smile at the familiar drama, then cut in before it could escalate. "Thor, you haven't told him about Odin's condition, have you?" Loki snapped his head toward Thor. "What, Thor? Are you hiding something from me?" Thor's expression darkened. "Father, I don't know precisely either. Lately, he's been sending me messages as if he were giving his final words. I think he's ill. Seriously ill. Sadness touched his features at the admission. Impossible, Loki said, disbelief flashing across his face. He'd spent millennia resenting many of Odin's choices, but Odin had also been the father he knew and loved, the one who'd raised him and whom he'd called king. The thought that the All-Father could be dying was hard to accept. Noah took a breath. Neither of you seem to know the whole truth, he said quietly. Your father, Odin, does not have much time left. Chapter 247, Warning to Sol. Your father, Odin, is not long for this world, Noah said. The Tesseract, which had been shown for a moment, was already back in Noah's backpack. He and the two Thor brothers stood on the balcony of the hotel where Tony had chosen to host the banquet. Noah was explaining Odin's condition to Thor and Loki. Both brothers' expressions changed at once when Noah spoke. The royal bloodline of Asgard carries a powerful force, Noah continued. I call it the Odin force. It grows with the reigning king, so when you take the throne, Thor, it should rightly be called the Thor force. In Asgard, the royal power is named for the current king. Odin's father was Bor, so once it was called the Bor force. Odin force? Do I have it? Why haven't I felt anything? Thor asked, looking at his hands as if he might discover it there. No, you simply haven't awakened your bloodline power yet, Noah said. Thor, at this point, could only be considered barely a god of the hammer. Without Mjolnir, he couldn't call down lightning properly. Noah ignored Thor's mutterings about his missing power and went on. This force intensifies with age. Your father's Odin force has grown enormous, and his control over it is slipping. The Odin sleep he's in now is meant to stabilize and sort the power inside him, but it's only a temporary measure. Eventually, the force could kill him from within. What? Why would something inside us try to kill us? Thor yelled, furious. He would rather not have a power that would endanger his father. Loki frowned. Human, is there anything you can do about this? Noah shook his head. The real problem isn't just the Odin force. It's his age. His lifespan is nearly spent, that you cannot reverse. Noah estimated Odin's age at well over 5,000 years, maybe approaching 6,000. Loki had once said in passing that Asgard's royal line could live at least 5,000 years, and that fit what Noah knew. By human standards, Odin's body was like a very old man, organs and reflexes slowing, resilience waning. The volatile Odin force becomes harder to control as the host ages. A possible remedy might be to use the power of the Resolve rune to pump life force into him, but that would only be appropriate when he truly reached death's door. In the film, Odin's end came after Loki stripped him of power and exiled him to Earth. He finally died of old age. Noah guessed Odin had been aware of his decline and let Loki take some of his power so he could spend his last years seeing Earth. Even weakened, Odin would be hard for Loki to overthrow if he had wanted to keep him alive. Barring something unforeseen, Odin still had a few years left. Noah also remembered that when Asgardians die, their souls go to Valhalla to revel. Death was not a terror for them. They could even influence reality from Valhalla. Heimdall could still use his seeing eye there, and Thor's think of dad moments in the film were likely Odin manifesting from Valhalla. With that added context, Thor and Loki fell silent. There was little they could change about the passage of time. No matter what, Noah said, even if your father passes on, he will go to Valhalla. There's one more thing I foresaw about Asgard itself. About Asgard? Thor asked, alert. Noah's visions showed me approaching darkness, he said. Asgard is heading toward war. War, Thor frowned. He had been busy putting down uprisings across the 9 realms since regaining his power, unrest born of his unauthorized expedition to Jotunheim. He had promised his father he would protect Asgard. Who could this be? Internal rebellions, or enemies beyond the 9 realms? Loki leaned against the balcony rail and spoke up. The Dark Elves, he said. Born of endless night, they steal light. Thor recited the old tale, as if remembering his mother's stories. The Dark Elves had once existed in the 9 realms during the Age of Bor. They had sought to use the ether to plunge the realms, and perhaps the universe, back into darkness. Bor led Asgard in a terrible war, and they eradicated the Dark Elves and destroyed the ether. That's what the war histories say, Loki added. But weren't the Dark Elves all wiped out? How could they attack Asgard again? Chapter 248, Dark Elves and Ether Particles. The Dark Elves were all exterminated, weren't they? How could they possibly attack Asgard again? Loki asked, puzzled. Noah's warning about darkness approaching Asgard made Loki think of the Dark Elves, but the old records declared them extinct. How could they come back? Thor nodded. When he and Loki were children, their mother, Frigga, had told them stories about the Dark Elves, and he remembered the ending clearly. Asgard had won. Noah, who exactly is the enemy, you mean? Thor asked. Exactly who Loki just mentioned, the Dark Elves, Noah replied. Both gods stared at him in disbelief. It's true, Noah went on. Your grandfather Bor didn't completely annihilate the Dark Elves. They went into hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. Noah explained that the Dark Elves' cloaking technology is extraordinarily advanced. Asgardian science had progressed 1,000 years since Bor's time, but it still couldn't penetrate that cloaking. After suffering a crushing defeat, Malekith chose to stop fighting and hid his people. He put the Dark Elves into a kind of hibernation and kept them sealed away until a signal from the ether, an ether particle, would wake them. In the events you know, it was Jane who accidentally came into contact with the ether, Noah said. She found it while investigating an unstable space on Earth and unwittingly released it from its seal. That signal was enough to rouse Malekith and his forces. Noah believed Jane's discovery of the ether was not random. A rare cosmic event was about to occur across the 9 realms, the convergence. These aren't 9 stars, but the 9 kingdoms under Asgard's influence, the 9 realms. At convergence, the boundaries between the realms thin and align. Physics breaks down. Gravity fluctuates, space compresses, and where the realms touch reality itself can be torn open. The ether alone is powerful, Noah said. But if Malekith waits until the convergence and unleashes the ether at the exact point where the 9 kingdoms connect, the effect would be amplified. The more realms that link, the more the ether's energy multiplies. In that position, its power could affect the whole universe, enough to plunge everything into darkness. That is why Malekith planned to strike at the Convergence Center. That is also why Jane's accidental involvement was so dangerous. The ether took her, and the signal it sent was all Malekith needed to wake his people. Noah had debated changing those events, but he didn't want to risk breaking the timeline. He didn't know whether he could reproduce Jane's path to the sealed site without help, and altering that accident could have unpredictable consequences. So he chose to leave those events intact and focus on preparing for the Dark Elves' return. You can investigate yourselves, Noah said, or wait until your father awake and ask him. But I advise you to get ready now. Don't underestimate the Dark Elves. Even Asgard must treat them with caution. Noah's warning carried weight. Physically, Malekith and many of his warriors aren't superlative fighters. Malekith is not the kind of opponent who relies on melee prowess. But the ether gives him a different kind of power. Someone who can truly master a single infinity stone can be more dangerous than one who clumsily uses several. That focused control can yield devastating results. Beyond Malekith himself, the Dark Elves have technologies and weapons Asgard can't easily counter. Their cloaked fighters, their black hole-style grenades, and the cursed warrior that nearly bested Thor in close combat. It was that strength and stealth that allowed the Dark Elves to strike Asgard's palace before and to kill Frigga. Noah had other thoughts, too. If the Dark Elves re-emerged, he intended to capture one of their great starships for study, or perhaps to use it. He'd always found Malekith's massive battleship impressive and had been looking forward to getting a closer look. Thor and Loki grew serious at the news. Thor asked, "Do you know where they are hiding?" Noah shook his head. No, they've been hidden for thousands of years. Finding them won't be easy. The movie and the old accounts never said where Malekith stowed his forces, which meant Noah could not simply point them to a lair and end the threat outright. All right, Thor said after a moment. We'll return to Asgard and begin our own investigation. Thank you, Noah. Thor hurried back into the banquet hall to explain to Jane and the others, then slipped away with Loki. They went to an open space to summon the Bifrost. Outside, near a window that framed the shimmering arch of the Bifrost, Shawage watched the rainbow beam and turned to Banner. "No matter how many times I see it," she said, it still feels magical. Chapter 249. Tony wants to know the future. I wish everyone a happy New Year's Eve in advance. Noah, why did Thor and Loki go back? Tony moved to Noah's side and stared at the rainbow beam streaking across the sky outside the window. Thor had suddenly announced he had to return to Asgard, urgently. Tony was puzzled. Had something happened to Thor's family? Why the rush, especially with Jane still here? They're probably going back to have a heart-to-heart with their father, Noah said, averting his gaze from the window to Tony. A heart-to-heart? Tony frowned. They didn't look like they were about to have a heart-to-heart. Both brothers had seemed solemn. Sad and serious at the same time usually meant trouble, didn't it? Nope, Noah said. I gave them some bad news. They rushed back to tell their father. You've only been here a few hours. How would you know Asgardian business? Tony challenged. Foreseeing the future. A little bit of magic, Noah replied, spreading his hands. Foreseeing? You can do that? Tony's interest perked up. He'd seen Noah do strange things, but forecasting the future? If Noah could actually do that? Want me to tell you yours? Noah prodded. Tony blinked. He was curious, though skeptical. Still, Noah's abilities were visible to everyone here. Maybe he could. Foresight comes at a cost, Noah warned. Let me think about what I'll tell you. He hesitated. Should he drop something dramatic, like Tony's death? No. It was a party night. He didn't want to ruin the mood. He decided to give Tony something happier. You'll have a daughter, Noah said. What? Tony was caught off guard. A daughter? Tony went quiet, the idea tumbling through his mind. Who would she be with? Pepper? Of all people, he'd marry only Pepper, right? He stared out the window, trying to imagine. Yes, a very cute little girl, Noah added. Tony blinked and looked back. You can see scenes from the future? Can I see her? Curiosity won. Since Noah had already spoiled that there would be a daughter, Tony wanted to see what she looked like. All right, Noah said after a moment. He weighed the implications of showing future images, then shrugged. He was here to change things anyway. Noah extended his left hand, palm up, hovered his right hand over it, and gently waved his fingers. Magic pooled at his fingertips and built the outline of a small girl above his palm. The image was Morgan Stark. Noah had fashioned it from what he remembered seeing in the movies of his previous life. The Tony and Captain America in this world resembled the versions he'd known, so Noah figured Stark's daughter would as well. When the projection formed, Tony's gaze locked on it. What an angel, Tony breathed. What's her name? Noah raised an eyebrow. I can't answer that. What do you think? Naming her was part of the moment. Noah felt he shouldn't impose it. Tony let it sit for a few seconds, a strange warm feeling rising inside him, and then the name came out before he realized it. Morgan. Morgan Stark. Noah's mouth quirked up. Maybe fate had a hand in it. He cupped the projection and exhaled. The image dissolved into motes of light that scattered into the air. Let me ask one more thing. My future wife? Ahem. Tony winked at Noah. Noah shot back. Who do you hope it is? Isn't that answer already in your heart? Tony faltered, coughed awkwardly, muttered something to Noah, and drifted off to another corner of the room. Noah smiled, then glanced at the antique grandfather clock hanging in the hall. The hour hand hovered between 11 and 12. Midnight was coming. Once it struck, Noah would accept the task to clear the corruption in the void. Even from Earth, he could sense the safeguards he'd set around that distant place. He checked them now. Everything held. When he accepted the mission, he'd be able to slip there and start clearing the corruption. How to spend the remaining half hour? He decided to stay away from the cluster of women and the mingling crowd. Coulson and Hawkeye had left earlier after talking with Tony. Black Widow was still here. Noah headed toward where Banner was standing with Dr. Eric Selvig and saw Tony moving that way too. As he drew near, he overheard Selvig's voice. Thor's hammer, what is it forged from? None of us can lift it, but he swings it with ease. It looks so heavy, yet he hangs it on a wall and the hook doesn't give way. They'd only started discussing the hammer after Thor left. Selvig had always been fascinated by it. Noah joined the group as they debated the mystery of Mjolnir, the hammer that defied ordinary physics, and listened as the conversation rolled into the night with the new year nearly upon them. Chapter 250, Hammer Time. It's not New Year's Eve yet. Let's be happy first. As Noah walked toward the science group at the banquet, Tony, Banner, and Shawege were in the middle of a heated discussion about Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. Before the banquet officially started, when everyone was still arriving, Thor had set his hammer down on a table and with a grin, declared that no one but him could lift it. Naturally, the crowd didn't take him at his word. The hammer hadn't crushed the table, so how heavy could it really be? Thor invited everyone to try, with the teasing claim that whoever could lift Mjolnir would inherit the power of Thor. Interest spiked instantly. Tony, as host, was first. He swaggered to the table, rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, and gripped the hammer's handle. He tried with a normal grip, then with both hands, but it didn't budge. A little embarrassed, he excused himself and returned moments later in the gray destroyer armor. Everyone chuckled at his theatrics, but even the armor couldn't lift Mjolnir. Tony let go, drew a breath, and looked at Noah. "Noah, give me that thing," he said. Noah understood what Tony meant. The last time Tony had tried the armor, Noah had helped activate it. But he shook his head. "It won't help, Tony. Thor didn't tell you everything. There are conditions. Even with the armor, you can't just force it." He explained what everyone could already sense. Mjolnir was not just heavy. It bore Odin's runes. To lift it, you needed strength, and you needed to meet whatever enchantment those runes demanded. Tony was strong enough in other ways, but he didn't meet both conditions. Thor waved a hand and admitted what he'd been withholding. Only a person of noble character and righteousness is worthy to lift Mjolnir and gain the power of Thor. Noble character? Righteousness? The words drew exchanged looks, but they didn't dampen curiosity. Everyone wanted to know whether the hammer would recognize them. Tony, already dubbed unworthy, took off his armor and sat back to watch, drink in hand. He wasn't crushed. He never considered himself especially noble, only competent. The rest of the crowd lined up. S-Healed agents Coulson and Hawkeye couldn't budge it. Black Widow didn't even try. There had been speculation, especially among those who remembered other versions of these events, about whether she might be able to lift it, but Noah sensed she simply wasn't interested. As a S-Shield operative, she wasn't about public displays. Banner tried next and nearly paid for it. He strained so hard that the veins along his neck and forearms darkened green, and for a few tense seconds, everyone glanced sideways worriedly. Luckily, Banner had enough control now that there was no transformation. Observers unfamiliar with him, like Sha Wei, Jane, and Daisy, put it down to odd lighting. One by one, the men went up, everyone except Noah. He'd already tested the hammer when it first appeared and had felt his own power clash with Odin's enchantment. He hadn't completed the attempt then, and now he was stronger than before, so he could have lifted it easily. Still, he stayed back, uninterested in the show. Steve Rogers, Captain America, approached and, under Noah's watchful eye, made Mjolnir tremble. Thor's face tightened at the sight. It was clear Rogers could have lifted it if he chose. Perhaps he didn't want to show off. Among the women, Pepper and Daisy gave perfunctory tries and failed. Then Gwen bounded forward, eyes bright. My turn," she exclaimed, and gripped the handle. To everyone's astonishment, the hammer rose as if it were featherlight. Gwen herself looked startled. A thunderclap rolled through the hall, though no bolt hit, and her ordinary clothes transformed into a blue and white gothic battle dress. Conversation died. The room watched, slack-jawed. Loki, standing nearby, went through a flicker of discomfort. His hammer, which he couldn't lift, had just been lifted by a girl, but quickly masked it with a smile as he peered at Thor, eager for his reaction. Thor's face was a tangle of emotions for a moment before he settled them. It seems Miss Gwen is truly a person of noble character, he said. He had been with Mjolnir for ages and trusted that it rarely erred. Gwen smiled a little shyly, set the hammer down, and returned to Lyssandra's side. She hadn't donned Thor's armor. Her clothes were simply transformed into her own battle attire. Noah was taken aback. He hadn't expected Gwen to be able to lift Mjolnir. She hadn't put on Thor's power, merely changed into her own outfit. Perhaps Mjolnir's power couldn't override the system's power that governed her form. The little interlude with Mjolnir had long since ended. At the start of dinner, Noah had checked Gwen over to make sure there were no lingering problems. Her body was perfectly fine. The divine power in Mjolnir came mostly from the hammer itself and the Odin runes carved into it. Whoever could lift the hammer could access some of Thor's power, but picking up Mjolnir didn't mean you suddenly possessed all of Thor's strength. When Gwen hefted the hammer, she could tap into what was inside it, but the specific power that had strengthened Jane's body in Thor 4 never activated for her. When that energy tried to contact Gwen's skin, it was blocked by another strong force, the runic magic already woven into her own body. That rune magic prevented unfamiliar forces from entering without permission, providing an effective protective barrier. Noah suspected the reason Gwen could lift the hammer was similar to Captain America's case. Mjolnir had, in some way, recognized her. Gwen had only recently become human, and fragments of her former mistress Isolde's kindness had carried over. Later, she joined the fight to stop Viego, showing resolve and selflessness. Noah thought those traits could have persuaded Mjolnir, though he also half-joked that maybe the hammer just found her cute. He wasn't overly worried about why she could raise it, only whether her body had suffered any lasting effects. He still planned a thorough check once they got home. Back in the banquet hall, after Thor and his brother hurried off toward Asgard, Noah walked over to the cluster of scientists arguing about Mjolnir. Dr. Shawigi was still puzzled. "The hammer doesn't feel all that heavy," she was saying. "But apart from that girl, none of us could lift it. And when it was hung on the rack, the hook didn't give way under the weight. How? You don't understand, Shawigi," Bruce Banner said. "It's magic." Tony Stark made a show of extending his hand and mimicking the little conjuring gesture Noah had used earlier. Banner laughed. "Stark, you know a lot about magic?" "Me?" Tony put on a mock-modest tone. "Hardly, but behold, the master of magic is here. Allow this master to instruct you both." He stopped the teasing when he saw Noah approach and listened instead. "I heard what you were discussing," Tony said more seriously. "The reason the hammer's weight doesn't seem to affect surrounding matter is the runic magic engraved on it." Noah nodded and filled in more. Mjolnir was forged by dwarves from a special metal harvested from a neutron star. That makes it incredibly dense and powerful. Add runic enchantments, and it can even defy gravity when it needs to. "Neutron star? How did they manage that?" Shawega blurted. "Dwarves, like the storybook ones, short, gold-loving blacksmiths?" Tony perked up at Noah's description of the forgers. "Are they really dwarves? Like, how short are we talking?" "No idea about the gold," Noah said with a half-grin, "but they're master craftsmen, Asgard's exclusive smiths. And they're not short, more like 4 to 5 meters tall. Kind of small giants, actually." 4 to 5 meters? Tony swore. "Then why call them dwarves? That is a terrible naming convention." Noah went on. "Their forging skills are exceptional. They can work with neutron star material and create weapons of enormous power. There aren't many of them. An asteroid under Asgard's protection housed most of them, and later, when Thanos made the Infinity Gauntlet, he slaughtered many." "That's an amazing race," Shawage said, eyes bright. "I'd love to see how diverse life really is out there." "We will get the chance," Banner replied. "This, what happened today, has lifted the veil. People on Earth will never see the universe the same way again." Tony nodded, but his expression was more private. The Chitauri attack had hammered home the same realization for him. The universe hid powerful threats, and Earth wasn't yet prepared. He thought of his family, of friends he needed to protect, and briefly, of what Noah had told him about a lovely daughter he'd have in the future. All of it hardened his resolve. "Nick Fury is putting together an initiative," Tony said after a beat. "He wants to form a team, people capable of dealing with incidents like today's, the kinds of threats humanity can't handle yet. He calls it the Avengers." "That's classified," Noah murmured. "Yeah, well, Coulson told me it's supposed to be hush-hush," Tony said without shame. "But the people I'm talking to here, you all seem perfectly suited. Consider me blunt, I don't have much patience for secrets when there's work to do." Chapter 252, Invitations and Refusal. Avengers, Banner, and Shawag exchanged glances. Tony had just invited them to join something called the Avengers. None of them had heard of the name before, but Nick Fury wasn't unfamiliar, the black one-eyed director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Noah looked at Tony. Coulson had already brought Tony on board with Fury. Tony had even begun recruiting others for the team. He seemed serious. Noah, however, had no interest. He didn't like answering to others, much less being micromanaged by a committee, so he said it plainly. I'm not interested in Nick Fury's Avengers initiative. What? Noah, won't you reconsider? Tony protested. Noah was exceptionally powerful. He was a top target for recruitment. Coulson had told Tony as much and asked him to try to sway Noah. Noah shook his head. If he needed to protect Earth, he could do it himself. No Avengers required. If he belonged to any group, it would be the League of Legends. He'd even considered forming such a league, though he'd balked at calling themselves heroes. He didn't see himself that way. Tony could only shake his head and turn to Banner. Bruce Banner was both an accomplished scientist and the Hulk, useful in the lab and on the battlefield. He was another high-priority recruit. Banner shrugged. I work for Noah. He's my boss. If he's not going, I'm not going either. Banner didn't much like official organizations either. If Noah wasn't joining, neither would he. Tony looked at Showag next. What about you? You on the list? She blinked. S. Heald had invited him to study the Tesseract. He might already be considered on their staff, though with the Tesseract gone, he wasn't sure of his status. We need lots of talent. Fighters, researchers, Tony said. Me, I'll have to think about it. I can't answer right now. Shawagi said after a moment. Okay, I'm clearly terrible at HR, Tony said, raising a hand. With the invitation clearly going nowhere, he fell silent. These matters belonged to Fury. The man would have already drawn up his list. Tony would wait to see how competent the recruits proved to be. The wall clock's hour hand crawled up to the 12. A new day had begun. Noah stood from the sofa. Lysandra and Gwen sat beside him. Conversation had run its course. It was time for business. I'm going to the restroom, Noah said as an excuse and slipped away. He briefly pinged Lysandra on his earpiece to tell her where he was. Once inside the teleport, distance would cut their connection. Noah entered the men's room in the hall, withdrew the Tesseract, and with its flashing blue light, opened a teleport to the universe. He'd already set protective measures, so nothing in the restroom was dragged in. He stepped through and arrived on the iron block suspended in the void. Before entering further, he opened the system's mission panel and accepted the task. Void Series B rank mission, clear the corrupted void. From his backpack, he took out the Canyon Maker, the Void Staff. Gripping it, he gathered void power and drew a line through the empty space before him. Where the staff passed, a void rift yawned open, revealing a hazy purple scene within. Noah stepped through and closed the rift behind him with a backhand. Inside lay the corrupted void, choked with malignant void energy. It hadn't erupted after he left, only been suppressed. Previously, Noah hadn't fully purged it to complete some earlier objective. Now that the mission was accepted, he meant to finish the job. He extended his left hand and let a torrent of void power flow into the corruption. The corrupted mass sensed its doom and writhed in a final, desperate surge, but it was futile. Noah's torrent swallowed it, and when the flow passed, the tainted region was gone, restored to normal void. Miles away, in a distant galaxy, Thanos suddenly clutched his chest. Pain lanced through him. At his side, the void-twisted supergiant and Ebony Maw dropped to their knees, groaning. Within Sanctuary 2, nearly all the soldiers, already corrupted by Thanos, howled in pain. Their screams cut through the ship and out into space. Even Sanctuary 2 itself seemed to cry out. Thanos had converted Sanctuary 2 into a void existence, just as he had Sanctuary 1. He staggered back to composure after a moment. Someone had purified the corrupted void he'd been sensing. That rupture in his control explained the pain. He stepped out onto the dock where Sanctuary 2 rested on the original planet's surface. In front of the ship yawned a vast pit, a bottomless chasm that tunneled deep toward the planet's center. Thanos walked to the edge and looked down. On this planet chosen by Thanos, half of all life had already been slaughtered. The remaining intelligent beings and animals hid, trembling in shelters and caves, uncertain whether the murderers would strike again. On the far side of the world, a vast purple behemoth stood in a clearing. What had once been forest lay flattened around it. Trees snapped and crushed where the creature had rampaged. It could hardly be called a mere animal. Patches of black metallic shell showed beneath rippling flesh, a grotesque fusion of organism and machine. This was Sanctuary 2, transformed by Thanos into a void creature. Sanctuary 2 dwarfed its predecessor. Where Sanctuary 1 had measured roughly 4,500 meters across, the Void version had swelled to about 5,000 meters. New razor claws had sprouted from its wings, and the ship's former bow had twisted into a gaping maw lined with countless teeth. When Noah had purified the last of the corrupted Void, every Void creature altered by Thanos, Sanctuary 2 included, had convulsed with pain. Sanctuary 2's massive body had then crushed the surrounding forest underfoot. Thanos, however, was unmoved. He stood by the rim of a vast pit, a tunnel gouged straight toward the planet's core. After the Void creatures had calmed, Thanos had the purple flesh mass, what remained of Corvus Glaive's body, moved from Sanctuary 2 to the pit. Ebony Maw and Supergiant had carried it, Ebony Maw's telekinesis suspending the writhing orb as they set it down before Thanos. The flesh ball's purple hue had faded, and its pulsing heartbeat slowed when the corrupted Void vanished. Thanos placed a hand on it. Under his infused Void energy, the color flared back and the pulse returned, stronger than before. "Is the tunnel complete?" he asked. "Master," Ebony Maw replied, "it breaks through the crust and reaches the core." "Good, you two hold this place. Do not let anyone interfere." Thanos withdrew his hand and nodded. Ebony Maw and Supergiant bowed, sliding to either side of the pit and unleashing a ring of Void power to guard the opening. Thanos gripped the flesh ball, hurled it into the darkness, and then leapt after it. The light vanished almost at once, but Thanos was unaffected. He released power to accelerate his descent, narrowing the gap until he caught up with the purple orb. It glowed faintly, lighting the tunnel walls. He seized it and fixed it at his side, then pushed himself to fall faster. Deeper and deeper the shaft plunged. Pressure climbed with the density of the surrounding rock, and the planet's internal magnetic field, toxic compounds, and radioactivity made the depths lethal to ordinary life. None of this troubled Thanos or the Corvus-derived flesh ball. Both bodies had been warped by Void energy into something that could survive the abyss. They moved like streaks of purple light through the tunnel, straight toward the planet's center. A heat and a dull glow ahead warned that they neared the core. The falling shaft ended where liquid iron and nickel, an outer core of magma, filled the way. This planet was solid like Earth, with a molten outer core and a solid inner core. Thanos glanced at the roiling metal, placed an energy shield over the flesh ball, then drove himself into the magma without shielding his own body. The searing liquid lapped and hissed against him, but left no mark on his thick skin. Even the membranes of his eyes were protected by a wash of power. He cut a path toward the inner core, smashing through vortices of molten iron and nickel until a dense metallic wall rose before him, the compressed, solid inner core he had been aiming for. Thanos paused, then pushed Void power outward to part the surrounding magma and carve a hollowness in the outer core. In the suddenly empty space surrounding the inner core, he floated, the flesh ball held before him. Chapter 254, Corrupted Planet. After becoming Void corrupted, forbidden knowledge had seeped into Thanos' mind. He believed it was a gift from the great corrupted Void, meant to help him realize his ambition. Now, with that knowledge, he would buy himself time after the Void's disappearance. He raised the glowing orb of Void flesh before him and began to draw the Void energy from within his body. Light flared from his skin, even his eyes glowed. He poured the Void power into the orb, transforming it. Under the steady influx of energy, Corvus Glaive's corpse shifted from a mass of ragged flesh and exposed veins into something with a smooth, glass-like surface. Inside, structures and strange sigils rearranged themselves under Thanos' control, forming an unknown magic array. When the power ebbed, Thanos eased his hand away, breathing slowly. It no longer looked like a mere flesh orb. It had become something like a treasure, an orb as large as a man, its surface gleaming purple. Thanos had poured most of his power into it to effect the change, and his recovery after the corrupted Void's disappearance was painfully slow. He didn't wait until he was fully healed, only until his breathing steadied, and then he acted again. Holding the purple orb, he pressed it to the planet's core. Where it touched the iron wall, there was no impact. Instead, the orb merged seamlessly with the surface. As he pushed, it dissolved into the core, the orb's substance turning into a flow of purple energy that tunneled through even the dense material with no resistance. The energy flew inward until it hovered at the planet's center. Thanos smiled faintly and clenched his fist, coaxing the energy to condense. For a moment it pulsed, and then it flared, melting the surrounding core and leaving a circular void. The energy reformed into the orb shape and sat embedded within that cavity, perfectly fitted into the planet's heart. This was the critical part. Thanos called on void power again. Purple light shimmered around his hand as he linked to the distant implant. The orb within the core began to pulse. Then hairline cracks spread across the planet's interior. From those fissures, small, luminous tendrils unfurled, threading through the solid iron as if it were smoke. The tendrils lengthened and thickened. From their surfaces, smaller branches sprouted like roots on a tree, weaving outward in all directions. From his vantage, a thick, glowing limb grew from the core and spread through the planet. A rare smile crossed Thanos' face. His plan was working. As the tendrils continued to propagate, they would eventually suffuse the entire world and emit a steady stream of void energy, converting the world into a void star. That void-transformed planet would continuously generate the void power he and his followers needed now that the corrupted void itself was gone. Satisfied, Thanos turned and flew back toward the original tunnel. There was nothing more to do. He would leave the rest to time as the tendrils slowly expanded. Once the Void Star formed, it would be time for his Void Legion to set out. Earth. Hey, stop! Drop whatever you're holding. Put it down now. A New York police officer shouted down a dark street. After the Battle of New York, most civilians had been evacuated to designated safe zones so authorities could begin cleanup. Post-battle recovery was dangerous work. Unattended corpses could spark epidemics. Unstable explosives might still detonate, and alien wreckage could harbor unknown pathogens. Fortunately, the foes had not been human. There were no mangled bodies strewn everywhere. But the alien remnants, Chitauri armor and weapons, required specialist handling, so hazmat teams in thick suits processed most of the bodies and debris while the NYPD cordoned off the area, searching for stragglers and keeping looters from getting hold of alien tech. A few people had refused to leave. Small-time criminals, opportunists, and gang members had stayed behind, hoping to profit. Now, several NYPD units had surrounded a bank. A blast had ripped a hole in its wall. Inside, a handful of men were stuffing vault cash into duffel bags, Chitauri rifles tucked under their arms. "Boss, the cops have us boxed in. What do we do?" A lookout hissed. The ringleader laughed. "We've got these guns. We're not afraid of them. Once we're out with the cash, we'll mow them down, grab these weapons, and flee the country to spend the rest of our lives." "They heard how those things fired," another muttered, confidence in his voice. "Right," the boss crowed. "We'll break their line before the superheroes get here." "Boss, wait. Who are you? How did you get in?" Someone inside the bank cut in, startled, as a new presence made itself known. Several small-time crooks who had grabbed Chitauri weapons that fell outside the battlefield let greed get the better of them and became bank robbers. Under cover of darkness, they tried to hit a street bank. They hadn't been there long before the New York police discovered them. Squads were mobilized, and the bank was quickly ringed by officers. The lookout froze when he saw the scene outside. The excitement that had been rising in his chest died as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over him. He tightened his grip on the Chitauri rifle and ran back inside to the others, who were stuffing cash into a satchel. "Boss, there's so many cops out there. You said they'd be tied up tonight," the lookout shouted, voice trembling. He'd been a petty hood most of his life. Even with an alien weapon in his hands, he wasn't made of iron. After the adrenaline ebbed, panic rushed in. Earlier, after they'd scavenged the alien guns, their leader, the boss, had convinced them to try something they'd only ever joked about: rob a bank. A few had hesitated, but the boss had reassured them. "New York's been invaded today," he'd said. "The police will be busy. They won't be coming after us." That sounded sensible enough, and the men had begun to imagine the good life the stolen money would buy. Now the lookout's report shattered that fantasy. The police had already surrounded the block and could sweep the bank at any moment. Even with Chitauri rifles, the handful of robbers couldn't stand against that kind of force. The boss was a bald black man in a yellow vest. His muscles and tattoos showed on his shoulders and arms, giving him a menacing air. He kept cramming bills into a satchel. When the lookout shouted, anger flickered across his face, then smoothed into a practiced calm. The more important thing was keeping his crew from panicking. "Ha ha ha, relax," he barked. "No matter how many of them there are, once they see what we've got, they won't want to die for a few $1,000. They'll back off. We'll grab the money and skip town, start a new life somewhere no one knows us." Whether he believed it or not, his men seemed steadied. "Boss. Yeah, boss. Wait, who are you? How did you get in?" The lookout stammered, his fear receding into confusion. Before anyone could say more, a shape slid out of the bank's dark corner. The robbers all turned, and their faces went slack. The man emerging was the spitting image of their boss. Same bald head, same build, same familiar sneer. He stepped into the dim light with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What is that?" the lookout whispered, hand shaking as he raised the Chitauri rifle and shouted. "It's a fake! Kill him! He's pretending to be our boss!" Someone else cried. The real boss startled, tossed the satchel aside, snatched up his rifle and fired. A blue energy bolt leapt from the muzzle. The others followed, converging their aim on the double. Several charged shots flew, but the man who looked like their leader moved as if he'd been expecting them. He swept into their line of fire and dodged each bolt with uncanny ease. The energy rounds slammed into concrete, ripping open the bank wall and making the cops outside glance up in confusion. Was there already a firefight inside? The look-alike closed the distance in a heartbeat. The Chitauri rifle wasn't an automatic. It shot powerful, slow bolts, and the fake boss simply avoided them. The robbers braced for an attack. Then he didn't strike. Instead, he reached out and ran his hand over the rifles in their grasp. What happened next was impossible. The weapons, precious salvage they'd risked everything to grab, crumbled under his touch. The metal and alien components collapsed into a dry, gritty mass and slipped out of their hands, falling to the floor in little heaps of sand. "What the hell?" one of them swore. In less than a second, the imposter had touched every rifle, where each had been sat a small pile of sand. He didn't stay to watch the panic he'd caused. He glanced toward the vault, melted back into the shadows, and disappeared. The robbers were still gaping when metal clanged from the vault door, and the room was suddenly drowned in blinding light, as if daylight had burst inside. The flash burned across their retinas, followed by a concussive blast that felt like hammers on their eardrums. Flashbangs, thrown by an advancing SWAT team, turned their confusion into helplessness. SWAT operators, wearing goggles and protective earmuffs, poured through the doorway and secured the stunned robbers in seconds. Nobody mounted a fight. When the officers searched the suspects, they found no alien weapons, only the handful of cash the thieves had been throwing about, and several little piles of sand where the rifles had been. A short distance away, in a narrow alley not far from the bank, the man who had posed as the boss peeled back into shadow and reappeared as if nothing had happened. Chapter 256, The Eternals, Leaving New York. The sudden robbery dissolved almost as quickly as it had begun. Police were combing the bank for alien weapons the thieves might have grabbed, convinced that without hidden gear, the culprits could not have disappeared so fast. They bagged the conspicuous little piles of sand from the vault floor for analysis, though the results would almost certainly be ordinary sand. Once the incident was processed, most units went back to regular duty, leaving only a skeleton investigative team behind. There were other disturbances across New York, none as clumsy as this robbery, but the city was restless. In a narrow alley not far from the bank, a shadow detached itself from the walls. The figure that stepped out was the same imposter who had stopped the robbers. The hulking black-balded man he'd been moments before melted away and reformed into a black-haired, scholarly Chinese woman. When that transformation finished, another figure slipped from the corner, short, golden-haired, and childlike. "Cersei, why get involved for no reason?" the girl asked, shrugging. They were the two Eternals Noah had once seen at the amusement park, Cersei and Pike. Using Pike's power to cloak them in illusion, Cersei had slipped into the bank and, by altering matter itself, turned the Chitauri energy rifles into fine sand. "Pike, this city has been our home for so many years," Cersei said, hands on the handles of their suitcases. Helping the police is the least we can do before we leave. They were already packed. Cersei and Pike were Eternals, sent to Earth long ago by the Celestials to root out the deviants. After that task was done, they waited for new instructions that never came. Over time, the 10 Eternals quietly separated and took up lives scattered across the globe. Cersei and Pike had lived together in New York for a long stretch, but lately Cersei had felt the city growing less safe. Superheroes appeared with increasing frequency, aliens had invaded today, and certain people seemed to notice her, like the man from the amusement park. Craving a quiet life, she decided it was time to move on. Pike shrugged. She didn't attach to humans or cities the way Cersei did. Physically forever a child, her temperament was odd and distant. "Should we tell Icarus we're leaving?" Pike asked suddenly. Cersei's face tightened. "Icarus hasn't contacted us in a long time. I don't know where he is. If he wants to find us, he will." Icarus was an Eternal too, their greatest warrior, able to harness cosmic energy, fly, fire beams from his eyes, and match anyone for raw strength. He and Cersei had once gone through a human-style wedding, witnessed by their kin. Then, years ago, Icarus had simply gone elsewhere. He hadn't died. Eternals don't simply vanish that way, but he had left without explanation. Pike had lived alongside Cersei partly because Icarus had been there. She had secretly loved him but never confessed. His disappearance had left her both relieved and quietly pained. After a pause, Cersei tightened the collar of her green trench coat and hoisted her bag. "Let's go, Pike." Their next stop would be London. Tonight, New York looked evacuated in many neighborhoods, but places like Hell's Kitchen would never be calm. To ordinary citizens, the events of the day were a catastrophe. To criminals, they were an opportunity. Many ignored the evacuation orders and took to looting shops. Local gangs vied for scattered alien debris and weapons, not openly coveting the most dangerous finds for fear of retaliation, but fiercely contesting whatever they could grab. Hell's Kitchen descended into chaotic turf fights. Matt Murdock, the blind lawyer known to the city as Daredevil, was starting his own long night. While at the law firm, he'd watched reports of the invasion on the TV and wanted to go out and help, but his colleagues had quickly ushered him to a shelter for his safety. Packed in with everyone else, he had found no chance to slip away, so he'd spent the day listening to the radio. Now at last, he'd managed to get back onto the streets and was heading into Hell's Kitchen to stop the ruffians taking advantage of the turmoil. Chapter 257, Chaos at Night. Tonight would be anything but peaceful for New York City. After an unprecedented alien attack during the day, the city's residents spent the evening shaken and fearful. Some superheroes had pushed back the invaders and saved lives, but when night fell, the streets were a lawless mess. Those who had ignored the government's evacuation order would now be grateful they hadn't stayed. With most people evacuated, small-time thugs who normally ruled minor corners of the city were running rampant. They smashed storefronts and looted whatever they could carry, thinking no one could stop them. But they'd miscalculated. The local police force alone wasn't enough to maintain order after such an enormous incident, and this time, departments and agencies from several nearby cities had sent reinforcements. The result was a heavy, visible presence. Squads of uniformed officers, SWAT teams, drones overhead, and plainclothes detectives lying in wait. The petty looters would be rounded up soon enough. Harder to control were the organized gangs of Hell's Kitchen. These weren't petty arsonists and smash-and-grab thieves. They were after the alien weapons left behind by the Chitauri. Hell's Kitchen had always been a pressure cooker of gangs, mafia connections, and political corruption. In the chaos after the attack, rival crews who'd managed to get hold of Chitauri arms were using them to eliminate competitors and seize territory. Gunfire lit up alleyways across the neighborhood. "Officer, aren't we going to break that up?" a SWAT member asked from behind a cordon, watching tracer fire puncture the dark. "Let them fight it out for a while," the commander replied, puffing on a cigarette and letting the smoke curl into the night. "The civilians were evacuated during the day. What's left are criminals. We'll sweep in when the shooting dies down." All exits and entrances to Hell's Kitchen had been sealed like a drum. Drones monitored the skyline, while rapid response teams and plainclothes officers fanned out on the ground. The area was contained and watched from every angle. Hell's Kitchen's tangled web of crime had long been left alone for reasons of convenience and influence, the kind of self-interest that tied the hands of those who could have acted sooner. But after the alien attack, higher-ups had decided to send a message. Some things were beyond anyone's private reach. Those who overreached would pay the price. From the top floor of his skyscraper, Kingpin watched the chaos through floor-to-ceiling windows. He smoked a cigar, looking down at the muzzle flashes and the wrong kind of fireworks blooming across the district. Years of clawing his way to the top had taught him exactly what to touch and what to leave alone. That didn't mean he wasn't interested in the alien weaponry. He had quietly put people into motion, groups that seemed unrelated on the surface, but were ones he'd nurtured for precisely this kind of dirty work. He inhaled and let the smoke curl out slowly. "Let them fight," he murmured, a small smile darkening his face. "In the end, there'll still be only one Kingpin in this city." "Are these guys on steroids tonight?" Daredevil muttered as he landed on a high wall, the sounds below sculpting a clear picture in his head. The battle noises were precise to him. Shouts, kicks, the staccato of gunfire, the metallic click of unfamiliar alien weapons. The left shoulder of his costume still smoked. Where a shoulder pad should have been, the fabric had been burned away, leaving a charred hole and scorch marks on the skin beneath. He tested the joint and felt the dull ache from the burn. Earlier, during a clash, one of the thugs had pulled out a weapon he hadn't seen before and fired. A surge of danger lit up his senses, sharpening his perception so he could barely get out of the way. He'd been grazed, enough to vaporize the shoulder guard, but the wound could have been much worse. Compared to being torn apart by an unknown energy round, a burned shoulder was a small mercy. His vision had started to come back, slowly, after the health elixir Noah had given him. The recovery was gradual. He wasn't fully sighted yet, but he could make out the lights and shapes below far better than before. He'd even altered the eye area of his cowl in response. Once blind, those eye slits had been nothing but decoration. Now that sight was returning, he'd had to make practical changes. He owed the miracle to Mr. Yasuo, the swift-winged swordsman, whose potion had let him see again. He hadn't met Yasuo since, but he'd heard reports and seen footage about him on the news and from colleagues. Daredevil sized up the scene, tightening his grip on his billy clubs. Beside him, a Chitauri rifle he'd confiscated and tied up with rope sat where he'd left it. He'd taken several alien weapons earlier, prizes for gangs who'd stumbled on them, but he had no intention of using them. They were too dangerous. He trusted his own weapons and skills more than anything with alien energy inside. Click. He snapped the two sticks together to form a single staff, felt the familiar weight, and leaped down into the chaos. Chapter 258, Brawl in Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen had become an unprecedented battlefield. Gang members clashed across the district as smoke, gunpowder, and repeated explosions filled the air. Energy blasts from Chitauri weapons tore through reinforced concrete as if it were paper. Outside, a line of hundreds of SWAT officers was steadily tightening its perimeter. Flashbangs went off everywhere. The sudden light and concussive shocks left unprepared gangsters disoriented, and those who weren't stunned were riddled with bullets. Some gang members sobered and tried to flee. Others, still lost in a frenzy, were killed by rivals or incapacitated and arrested by the police. Daredevil moved through the chaos, taking out crazed thugs non-lethally, knocking them down until they could no longer resist, and leaving the processing to the cops. He generally avoided established police routes. As a lawyer, he knew his actions were illegal, and he did not want to interfere with operations. Still, during his patrol, he noticed two people who, like him, had not evacuated: a broad-shouldered, bald black man and a white woman. They were not together. He encountered them separately. Daredevil did not reveal himself. He observed them from the shadows. The black man appeared to be an ordinary strongman at first, but when Daredevil watched, he saw something remarkable. The man could stop bullets with an outstretched palm. Round after round struck his hand and slid off as if hitting armor, leaving the skin unscathed. Other parts of his body showed similar resistance, and his strength was prodigious. A single punch could send a thug flying several meters. The woman was inside a bar where gunfire echoed. She moved with superhuman speed and strength, taking down attackers one by one and then leaving without a backward glance, vaulting out of sight with powerful leaps. She nearly saw Daredevil once, but his concealment held. He didn't approach either of them. He didn't know whether they were allies or threats, but he memorized their faces. Though his eyesight was limited, his ultrasonic scans rendered far more detail than a normal eye could, and the contours of both faces were imprinted clearly in his mind. Satisfied, Daredevil returned to his work. He encountered no other powered individuals, though he did spot Iron Man flying in the distance. He paid it little mind and kept tallying his deeds. Tony Stark had been able to make it because the banquet had ended and the civilians had dispersed. Captain America and Black Widow had returned to S-Shield. Noah had left Earth after bidding Tony farewell and taking Lysandra and Gwen with him. He'd also arranged for Banner to return to the island base through a teleportation portal. Tony had intended to spend time with Pepper after the banquet, but when he learned Hell's Kitchen had erupted, gangs using alien weapons, he postponed that plan. He didn't put on the destroyer armor. It was still recharging after being nearly drained in the earlier fight. He had even paused its charging when he went to the banquet, so it wasn't ready. Instead, he suited up in the Mark VI, the version New Yorkers recognized best. Flying above the SWAT line, Tony called down in his usual quip-filled tone. The sight of Iron Man briefly stirred the officers, but a stern reprimand from command over their channels forced them back to duty. Before the police could speak with him, a scattering of bullets rang out and pinged off Tony's armor from somewhere in the distance. "Looks like the other side of the party isn't very welcoming," he said with a grin. Then his thrusters flared, tracing streaks of fire through the smoke as he dove into the fray. "Accept the little party favors I brought. Get some rest, Gwen." Noah called after Gwen as she rushed to her room as soon as they got home. She waved in response. He planned to do her physical exam the next day. After the day's battles, everyone needed rest. Even he felt the fatigue of too many fights. Noah had already finished the previous Void cleanup mission. On his mission panel, only one B-rank Void creature elimination remained unaccepted. Today's mission attempts were spent, so he would have to wait for the next refresh to take it on. Noah stretched, decided to turn in early, and left the remaining matters for tomorrow. Chapter 259, Various Interviews. I've never seen anything like this. This is just too cool. On the TV, a field reporter was interviewing people who had been moved to a government shelter. Many had witnessed yesterday's battle firsthand. The current interviewee was a high school-aged boy with curly blonde hair in a baseball jacket. When the reporter asked how he felt about what had happened, he beamed, barely containing his excitement. "An alien invasion. It was amazing, like in the movies. And those superheroes were awesome, especially that guy who was flying around in the sky yesterday." "Was that Thor?" The camera cut to the next person. "Superheroes? You mean those people who were flying?" "Yeah, they were incredible. Oh, are you filming me?" The new interviewee was a freckle-faced girl around the same age. She was tying up her brown curls when she noticed the camera. An excited grin spread across her face, and she pulled out her phone. "Hey, I recorded some of the fights yesterday. Follow me on Facebook. I'll post the clips. My account is..." The reporter forced a polite smile and signaled the cameraman to move on. "Honestly, I have reservations about these so-called superheroes." The next interviewee was a well-dressed, middle-aged blonde man who looked like a corporate professional. He was still in his work clothes, as if he hadn't had time to change since the attack. "They did protect us, but I also saw chaos and destruction. We need a more controlled, balanced way to handle crises. And where did all the taxes we pay go? Why wasn't our army here at such a critical moment?" The female reporter's smile remained professionally fixed, but a message in her earpiece cut him off. If she let him keep talking, he might say something incendiary. "Okay, sir, thank you for the interview." As the reporter moved through the shelter, opinions varied. "Why didn't they come sooner?" "If they had, my family wouldn't have died," one grieving survivor cried. Her family had been killed during the Chitauri attack. A small boy clutching an Iron Man toy shouted with glee, "My favorite is Iron Man. He wears such cool armor, he flies, and he beats so many aliens. I want to be a hero like him and protect people. Not all commentary came from the scene. Pundits and experts filled studio panels across networks. The actions of these superheroes may trigger greater disasters, one analyst warned grimly. Their existence undermines social stability and creates opportunities for terrorists and criminals. We can't rely on these unpredictable, uncontrollable forces for public safety. Another commentator added in a low voice, "They bring chaos and panic, not peace. Look at the city. How many buildings were destroyed? How many innocent people were injured or killed? We don't need private armed forces operating without limits. They should be regulated, even banned." In a dim office, a conservative politician addressed the camera with a grave expression. The events in New York hit the world like a boulder in a calm lake. Nearly everyone was talking about it. This wasn't a scenario from a film anymore. It had actually happened. Noah reclined on his sofa, watching the reports and flicking through channels on the projection panel. He'd seen the full range of reactions. Young people enchanted by the spectacle, older people terrified that it could happen again, critics blaming the heroes for attracting the aliens and demanding accountability. Noah thought people were missing the point. If anyone had to answer for bringing the Chitauri, it would be S.H.I.E.L.D., not the heroes. Under public pressure, the government had obtained basic information about the various superheroes from S.H.I.E.L.D. and released it, names and titles to offer some explanation. Searches for Iron Man and the Swift-Wind Swordsman had been high already, but queries for Thor, Loki, Hawkeye, and Black Widow suddenly shot to the top globally. Thor and Loki, two godlike brothers from Asgard, now revealed to be extraterrestrial, drew intense attention as figures from myth become real. The most striking image, though, was of a glowing figure shown after the other heroes. Instead of a name or title, the government displayed a question mark. The authorities said they didn't know who he was. Netizens, however, quickly dubbed him God. When that glowing figure appeared, people around the world experienced an unexplained, simultaneous healing. Physical wounds mended. The sight and the effect stunned everyone, and some religious believers declared it the manifestation of the deity they worshipped. Chapter 26 Future Itinerary. So these so-called superheroes must, Noah muttered, as the pundits and professors on every channel began to spin their theories. He killed the TV and stretched out on the sofa, turning his thoughts over like a puzzle. The Battle of New York was done. That was Avengers 1. What came next? Noah ran through the movies from his previous life. After Avengers came Iron Man 3, a plot set in motion by Aldrich Killian's development of Extremis. Killian had been practically created by Tony's own selfishness. The rooftop incident, where Tony told someone to wait and then never showed, choosing instead to go to bed with a beauty and leave Killian shivering in the cold. Next was Thor, the Dark World, the Nine Realms alignment, spatial distortion, and the Dark Elves' invasion of Asgard to seize the Ether, the Reality Stone. That one mattered to Noah because it involved an Infinity Stone. Now that he had the Space Stone, he could monitor spatial anomalies around Earth and should be able to pinpoint when the Reality Stone would surface. There was also the simpler option. Strap a tracker to Jane Foster and watch her. The day she vanished would mark the stone's emergence. After Thor 2, the original timeline moved to Captain America 2. In that movie, Cap and Black Widow uncover Hydra's presence inside S.H.I.E.L.D., which then reveals its plan to use 3 helicarriers to eliminate anyone who could threaten Hydra's rise, leading to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s collapse. Noah had no intention of letting Hydra survive to that point. He planned to strike at Hydra now, not wait for Captain America's mission to expose them. As for the rest, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, Noah wasn't focused on them yet. Guardians were far away in space. He'd take care of Earth first, before bringing his morning star to the wider universe. Black Panther didn't interest him much. Doctor Strange was a wild card. Noah didn't know what the Ancient One was thinking, so he had Lysandra monitor the web and alert him the moment anything popped up about Stephen Strange's car accident. With the near-term events laid out, Noah set his priorities. Take out Hydra inside S.H.I.E.L.D., then see if the Extremis timeline could be accelerated. That would make Killian expendable. He also wondered about Tony. Without the PTSD he had in the original timeline, would Tony still have the impetus to create Ultron? Another, more pressing task had appeared. Noah had checked his mission panel earlier and found the A-level task about the Celestials had changed. The Celestial revitalization countdown had leapt forward. What had been a year was now down to only 6 months. He suspected this was because the Resolve rune he'd used against Corvus Glaive had dissipated afterwards, increasing vitality on Earth and hastening the advent of God's Day, the birth of a newborn Celestial. It meant he needed to find the Eternals soon. Ajak, preferably. The Ancient One had already told him about Ajak, that she had met with the leader of the Eternals and had informed Ajak of Noah. The Eternals' leader was now expecting him. If he had time in a few days, he'd go meet Ajak. The sooner the Celestial problem was settled, the better. Initially, he'd planned to delay until the last moment because he lacked the strength and trump cards. Facing the Eternals alone was manageable, but a Celestial that had actually been born would have been too much. Now things were different. He had the Darkstar Thresh experience card, a power capable of waging war against Celestials. He could be confident he wouldn't be outmatched. Noah sat up, checked the time, and called up the stairs. "Gwen, come down, it's time for your physical." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Coming," replied Gwen, and a moment later, she opened her door and padded down the stairs in cute pajamas. "Let's go, to the lab," Noah said. Down in the lab, Lysandra was already setting up the equipment for Gwen's exam. When the two arrived, Lysandra met Gwen with a gentle pat. Nanoparticles rose from Gwen's chest and assembled into a white nano bodysuit designed for the exam, clinging to her figure. Noah blinked, then tucked his surprise away. His self-control was always good. Gwen lay back in the medical pod. When the door sealed, scanning beams swept the interior and the diagnostics began. Noah and Lysandra stepped up to the display to read the results. "Everything looks normal," Noah said, folding one arm and resting his chin on the other hand as he studied the readouts. "If the scanners don't pick it up, Noah, you might as well try a magic scan," Lysandra suggested. The pod door opened and Gwen sat up. Lysandra stepped closer, her expression serious. "Okay, I'll take a closer look,"